today for our fourth session of our seminar series. I am Andresa de Souza Santos, lecturer at the Latin American Center, and I have two co-conveners for this series, Dr. Francesca Lessa, who is also a lecturer at the Latin American Center and at Development Studies, and Dr. Marianne Jimenez, who is a postdoc at the LAC. And you're all very welcome to this session. Today, we will hear about a book that is the result of 18 months of ethnography in a low-income neighborhood near Salvador. This fieldwork showed that conversion to the evangelical Christian faith was a strategy of survival. Protestant Christianity will be discussed in its positive impact on Black lives, resulting in actual social mobility. The discussion in the book is very innovative, given the predominant analysis of negative effects of Pentecostalism in Brazil, which is the most popular religion amongst Afro-Brazilians. This book and this discussion is by Dr. Juliano. He has a master's and doctorate in anthropology from University College in London. His book, Povo de Deus, Quem são os evangélicos e por que eles importam? In English, People of God, Who the Evangelicals Are and Why They Matter, is Juliano's third book and was published in Portuguese in October 2020. His previous book is Social Media in Emerging Brazil and was published by UCL Press in 2017. Spire is currently head of human insights at Behup, which is a Brazilian startup. Juliano, you speak for about 40 minutes, and then there will be Q&A. Everyone is very welcome to write down questions in the chat, and I'm going to be looking at them. Or even better, if you can put your camera on during the Q&A, and then you can open your microphone and your camera and ask your question. While this is not happening, please mute your microphone so that only Juliano has his mic on during the presentation. Juliano, evangelical religion is really on the rise in Brazil. So clearly there is something good about it, something working. And I'm very excited to hear your necessary analysis. So please share with us your findings. And thank you for coming.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andresa. Hello, everyone. I have a written presentation here. So before I start, I'd like to thank the Latin American Center at Oxford University, the conveners of this seminar series, Dr. Andresa de Souza Santos, Dr. Francesca Lessa, and Dr. Marianne Jimenez Morales for this very kind invitation. Some friends and colleagues read and commented on earlier versions of this manuscript, and I would like to express particular gratitude to Dr. Peter Westman and Dr. Andrew Johnson. I really feel honored to be a guest speaker in this very important seminar series. So let's start. This is from a rap song from this new Brazilian rapper called Baco Exu do Blues. He wrote in the song Bluesman, everything that when it was black, it was from the devil, and then it turned white and it was accepted, I'll call blues. That's it, understand, Jesus is blues. Racism is a widely debated topic in Brazil today due to the size of African descended population. Brazil, as you know, is the country that received half of all slaves brought from Africa to the Americas. The racism that endures in social relations is also a topic for this debate to be happening. But more recently, because of the debates started with in the US as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. In this context of opening up and trying to clear the wounds of slavery, the news and analysis produced by Brazil's elite intellectuals in general describe evangelicals in simplistic and uninformed ways as being fanatical defenders of the ultra-conservative president Jair Bolsonaro, or as religious intolerance that attack places of worship of Candomblé and Macumba and other religions of African background. Given the connections in Brazil between people of African descent and evangelicals, between evangelicals and poverty, and the presence of a robust sociological literature on this subject, I intend to discuss in this paper two interrelated questions. The first one is, what mobilizes poor, predominantly Black Brazilians to convert to Protestantism? And the second question is, why is evangelical Christianity viewed as a social phenomenon, a subject virtually ignored by the predominantly white schooled elite in Brazil? Trying to, okay, so this, you should have seen this while I was introducing my paper. So now this is my a photo from my field site. I spent 18 months living and working in a poor neighborhood in the metropolitan area of the city of Salvador, which opened the opportunity for me to meet and become friends and participate in the lives and routines of some evangelical families, and participate also in the lives and routines of people living in that area as well. Salvador, some of you may not know, is in the northeast of the country. It's also Brazil's poorest region, and it's where the majority of the colored population in Brazil live. My ethnographic data are about ordinary evangelicals. During fieldwork, I observed and discussed with informants the consequences of religious practice and of sociality in local churches. For this reason, this article does not deal with issues such as religion and government politics at the local or national level. Living in an ordinary poor neighborhood, my interest concerning religion was to examine the consequences of evangelical Christianity for social mobility. I am not an expert on religion, and my doctoral research was about the uses of consequences of technology. But the growing importance of this topic in Brazil, its consequences mainly in the realm of politics and government, associated with the absence of literature that is accessible to readers who are not social scientists, motivated me to study and write about this sensitive subject. The book about evangelicals that I have written was released in Portuguese this past October, and to write it, I used my ethnographic data to present the key issues published by other social scientists from Brazil and other countries. So my book is an introduction to the topic based on a lot of the experiences I collected during fieldwork. My field research took place in one of the many urban peripheries in which evangelical churches have multiplied and continue to grow. I will not describe the location, briefly describe the location where the research took place and its residents. But further information on this introductory topic can be found in chapter 1 of the book, Social Media in Emergent Brazil, which is a version of my doctoral thesis published in 2017 by UCL Press and is available free in PDF format. So this is my research site from the more downtown area, if we can call so, to the outside area, but it's very clearly a place of of residents of working class Brazilians. My field research took place between April of 2013 and August of 2014. My wife, I, and our 2 cats moved with most of our furniture, as anthropologists do, from a middle-class neighborhood in the southeast of the country, actually the place where I am at this moment, to a low-income neighborhood on the edge of the metropolitan area of the city of Salvador, which is currently the 4th largest city in the country. an aerial photo, a photo from from a satellite of this our new neighborhood would show a pattern of urbanization that is similar to that of medieval towns and citadels. Instead of the regularity of modern city blocks, we would see a series of roads that meander from the center of the neighborhood to connect with other urbanized places nearby. We were quite at the edge of the city and rural areas. The growth of this neighborhood is uneven as a result from a gradual process of land occupation in the surrounding rural fields. In 2014, approximately 15 to 20,000 people lived in this neighborhood. There are no precise data due to this constant uh, uh, appearance of new occupied land and people moving in. Residents are mainly colored, young adults and adults who moved to the neighborhood in the last 40 years due to the opening of job opportunities associated with tourism, with the tourism industry. There are 9 large-scale international tourist resorts. And when I say large scale, I'm talking about from 400 to 2,000 guests simultaneously. And these resorts are located up to 20 kilometers distance from the neighborhood where we live. And they open every day of the year, as this is one of the main touristic areas in Brazil today. 3 times a day, as a consequence of the presence of these hotels, every day a large queue of buses enter and leave the neighborhood to drop off and pick up employees and go back to the hotels. Adults over 30 years old usually had a maximum of 4 years of basic education, and when they were not functionally illiterate, they read and wrote with difficulty. They mainly worked as cleaners, cooks, watchmen, drivers, gardeners, or had other manual occupations. Young people could have up to 13 years of basic education. 30 years ago, there was a very quick change in this neighborhood, and 3 new schools opened, government schools, public schools. So young people can have up to 13 years of basic education. So some of them, those with better education, get better paid jobs outside of the neighborhood as waiters, salespeople, or low-level admin employees in offices. Among young people with low schooling, which is also quite frequent, the dream is to buy a motorbike to work as couriers or transporting people on short distance trips. A motorbike would work as a this opportunity to have your own job and your own freedom and to earn money through this quite sexy product, interesting product for them. In terms of government services, the neighborhood had 3 schools, as I said, a health center, a police outpost, and an office in charge of social security issues. The service of the 2 primary schools is well rated by the residents. Neighborhood policing is inconsistent. Locals do not bother to call police or request ambulance services during emergency occasions because they often arrive late, or if they arrive. The health center and the high school are the target of most complaints due to the inadequate condition of buildings. So you have an idea, this health center works from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Queues start at 6 a.m. and people have to arrive very early to go there, and they have no specialists. So if you want to have an x-ray, for instance, very simple x-ray, you have to take a bus and ride for 80 kilometers to arrive at the nearest hospital. So a lot of complaints about this health center, and also about the high school. especially because of the absence of teachers at school and doctors and nurses at the health center. So I'll now talk about evangelicals in this neighborhood. Protestantism arrived in Brazil in the 19th century, and even Pentecostalism, the most popular Protestant branch today here, was already present in Brazil since 1910. Notice that Pentecostalism started in the United States in 1906. So only in 40 years and without formal missionaries, Pentecostalism had established churches in Brazil already in 1910. The evangelical boom happened in the midst of what anthropologist Gilberto Velho classified as Brazil's main social phenomenon in the 20th century. It's a very strong claim, given Gilberto Velho is among the most important, he unfortunately died a few years back, but one of the most respected anthropologists in Brazil, and the person that developed in Brazil the possibilities of doing anthropology in urban areas. And so he said the main social phenomenon in Brazil during the 20th century was the migration of tens of thousands of illiterate Brazilians from rural areas in the Northeast to the capitals of the South and Southeast. So these migrants settled in the surrounding areas of the city. We call these peri-urban spaces or neighborhoods periferias or peripheries. These rapidly expanding urban spaces lacked, and many still lack, fundamental government services and even Catholic churches in the vicinity. Catholic Church it takes a long time for a Catholic Church to establish itself in an area due to the lack of priests. It's a very slow process of educating somebody to become a priest. So no Catholic churches for a community that was strongly Catholic, those migrants. And in these locations, it is in these locations that evangelical community, evangelical Christianity expands. They represented, and this gives you a sense of the importance of this phenomenon today. In 1970, they represented 5% of Brazilians. And in 2019, which is 2 years ago, December 2019, according to Instituto Datafolha, there was one evangelical for every 3 people in the country, so over 30% of the population. We understand how evangelical Christianity is a phenomenon of the poor popular strata in Brazil when you enter a periferia. In the neighborhood where I am, in the middle upper class neighborhoods, you can barely see evangelical churches. But in the neighborhood where I lived, evangelical churches are literally everywhere. And they include a wide spectrum of Protestant organizations, from branches of historic denominations such as Baptists, Lutherans, all the way to Pentecostals. By contrast, so you have an idea, there were many dozen evangelical churches in all the sites. I would say close to 100. And this is in a small area with 15 to 20,000 people. But in the same area, there were only 9 candomblé yards and 1 small Catholic church. So this is the equation. By far, the most people in terms of religion were evangelicals. The largest local evangelical denominations in the neighborhood had their own buildings with internal spaces to house approximately 400 worshippers during services. They occupy extensive real estate location near large businesses such as food markets, pharmacies, construction material shops on the main street of the neighborhood. These churches generally represent nationally known organizations such as the Assembleia de Deus, the Assembly of God, or a Igreja Universal do Reino de Deus, which I'll translate and start using just the English translation, the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. And those are two Brazilian churches. The local Assembly of God had, in addition to its main temple, and this is again to give you a picture of the size of this community, the Assembly of God had the main temple, and together with it had 22 other churches in the same area that were connected and spread through all parts of the neighborhood, including the most remote areas. And this happens to facilitate so that residents of these remote areas, who often do not have cars or motorcycles, would access the activities of the churches. The smallest churches, mostly new denominations, invented denominations, give you a number. Every year, 14,000 new evangelical churches are opened in Brazil. So most of these new churches, they open in rented garage spaces in less visible areas of the neighborhood and operate with nothing but a few plastic chairs. The influence of evangelical Christianity can also be seen in relation to the number of activities that these churches offer. In some cases, there are activities throughout the week from morning to evening. The church is always open. The Assembly of God, one of the churches I attended regularly and was welcomed as a researcher, offered a variety of activities every day of the week, including services for specific themes, so service about marriage, a service about work, and so forth, Bible study courses, activities for teenagers and young people, and children, classes and rehearsals for church musicians, dance rehearsals for the church young women and children, counseling services for couples, among other regular events. These activities particularly address the needs of fathers and mothers who work during the day and do not want their children to be left unsupervised when they are not in school, which is half of the day. Larger churches in the country, and this did not happen in my neighborhood, but in other parts of the countries, those large churches, they may even invest on higher education of their female young adults to open their own nurseries and to have even schools for the community. The large number of evangelicals in the neighborhood and the importance of attending religious services in this population motivated the management of some of these large tourist resorts to provide room inside their businesses where ministers conduct services to employees working at night shifts and on weekends. As the literature suggests, the boom of evangelical Christianity in Brazil results from the rapid arrival of thousands of Catholic, poorly literate migrant workers. English sociologist David Martin characterized the, and I quote, explosion of Protestantism, end of quote, in Latin America in the 1980s as a, I quote, religion of the poor, end of quote, in societies where the Catholic Church was often rooted in the social conservatism of political and economic elites. He describes Pentecostalism as a religion, and I quote, preached in simple language, with simple examples, by simple people, for simple people, end of quote. Besides its religious assistance, evangelical churches provide a replacement for the networks of support that extended family members originally offered when they were back with their families in the Northeast before migrating. Churches themselves, but also church members acting informally, can supply their religious peers that are in need of food, help them to find work, arrange meetings with lawyers and doctors, and, as previously mentioned, offer much desired activities for children and teenagers while parents are away working. So I'll share with you now a quick case study. This is Irmão Sandro, or Brother Sandro. The experience of Sandro, one of my informants, during his conversion to Pentecostal Christianity may seem extreme, but it's no different than the experiences I heard from many other informants. The context is usually the same: a very unfavorable living situation associated with shortages of money, exposure to violence, substance dependence, illnesses, and different forms of abuse. Church attendance leading to the conversion often stabilizes and improves people's lives, as I will argue later on this paper. So Sandro was born in a rural village in the state of Bahia, same state where Salvador is. He never met his father, and at the age of 11, he left his home and his alcoholic mother to look for opportunities and adventures in the big city. He performed various types of unskilled work, moved several times from place to place, ending up in a favela in São Paulo, which is Brazil's largest city, had 3 children with different partners, and frequently used alcohol and cocaine at parties. This is something very usual to hear from evangelicals, as it's part of giving their testimony, the testimony of change. That's why there are so many details collected about conversion. When I met Sandro a few years after his conversion, 40 years old Sandro had an active routine in the neighborhood. He had acquired a 200 square meter plot to build his home on an occupied land on the border of the neighborhood. So quite a poor guy in general. And he had a baby son with his also converted new partner. He worked full-time as a builder, had various responsibilities at his church, the Assembly of God. And during his time on weekends, he was building his home and working with the other Assembleianos to build a branch of the Assembly of God in the area where he was living. On top of these activities, he accepted the somewhat dangerous, I could change to real dangerous position of president of the Association of Residents of that occupied land. Because of that position, he constantly dealt with government officials, political organizations supporting the homeless, and was the community spoken person when crime took place there, and had to interact and mediate between criminals and the police. Something that quite often falls in the lap of evangelicals, as they are respected as honest, hardworking people. I remember Sandro's story to mention it today. Recently, when I was thinking about the well-known Christian expression, "Jesus saves." One Saturday, Sandro left home to attend a service. It was already dark when he got on his motorcycle to go down a road without pavement and lighting. The road was approximately 800 meters long. There was vegetation and open fields on the sides, but no stores and no houses. In the distance, Sandro noticed the approach of a large, high-speed SUV coming in his direction. Before they crossed each other, the driver of the SUV made a very sudden maneuver, forcing Sandro to stop and almost fall from the motorcycle on the side of the road. There was no one else in the road, and the bright lights of the SUV were on Sandro's face. As he shut down his motorcycle, he saw the shapes of hooded people with weapons aimed at him. The car had no identification, but Sandro deduced that these people were part of a police surprise action to attack hiding places of local drug dealing gangs. The event lasted less than a minute, and Sandro literally said that to me. He thought he was going to die. It was quiet. No one spoke until eventually somebody from the car shouted, "He's a crente," meaning he's a believer. Let him go. The hooded man quickly entered the SUV and left. The expression "Jesus saves" generally refers to another type of salvation, the salvation of the soul. But in this neighborhood, and I believe across similar neighborhoods in Brazil, the expression might also carry a literal meaning. Sandro probably would have died. He thought so, and the statistics shows the same thing. Like many poor people, particularly those of color, had he not been wearing the typical clothes of evangelicals, the ones that I'm showing you here, which is quite different from the clothes non-evangelicals wear, which signals that he's a worker and not a criminal. So I talk about positive consequences, and I feel it's somewhat difficult in the academic environment to use this term positive, but I use it to point out how everything that is usually said and discussed about evangelicals are, I mean, evangelicals appear on the media if the story is about something wrong. And this is why I'm highlighting positive here. I will now briefly report what I observed living in this neighborhood about the positive consequences of that evangelical conversion produces. But it's important to have in mind, as David Smida's study of Pentecostalism in Venezuela concludes, that not everyone has the discipline and resources to uphold the consequences of conversion. Otherwise, family violence, drug addiction, and other common problems that are present in low-income areas in Latin America would have disappeared, according to Smido's argument. So first consequence, domestic violence. It is very common and known that in poor neighborhoods, for male partners to return to their homes drunk on weekends and to beat their wives and children. Conversion to Christianity forbids the faithful from consuming products perceived as drugs, including tobacco and alcohol. The consequence is a substantial reduction in domestic violence. 2, saving money and investing in the family. Men's Solidarity Network in poor neighborhoods is mainly the bar, and it's not uncommon for men to have parallel relationships with other women and eventually to establish more than one household. Christianity transfers the male social arena from the bar to the church. This results in saved money invested to improve the home, to provide leisure activities for the family, and to pay for children's activities, including private university education. 3, empowerment of women. This is a controversial issue. This is the only chapter that the person reviewing my book sent back saying this cannot be accurate. But I was just presenting the results from a substantial number of anthropologists dealing with this issue. So it's a controversial issue due to the difference in perceptions about empowerment for educated women and for working class women in Brazil. The gain of power of the evangelical women come mainly from the restrictions churches imposes to men, as mentioned on topics 1 and 2. So men are now contained in churches. Churches offer counseling services to resolve quarrelings, to promote intimacy and trust among partners, and as a consequence, evangelical women can be encouraged instead of criticized, as often happen outside of this community, as they switch from child and home carers and informal domestic workers to adopting formal paid jobs outside of the neighborhood, bringing also a very positive impact in terms of money and also other things that come with formal jobs, benefits and so forth. This is a brief description of a complex topic, and the impact of Christianity may differ depending on various conditions. However, it is noticeable that women represent the majority, 58% of evangelicals in Brazil, and also women are more efficient evangelizers, bringing people to church than men. So there must be something interesting for women to become evangelicals. Number 4, I'm talking again about positive consequences, and education and entrepreneurship. Illiterate adult evangelicals are encouraged to take literacy courses that some churches offer, or to return to church. I can discuss this. It's quite an interesting thing because it doesn't have to do with suggesting that the person go, but has to do with the person feeling inadequate in a place where everyone's during the service looking at the Bible and reading the Bible. So eventually that person that is embarrassed decides that he or she must also learn how to read and write. There are also studies that conclude how low-income Brazilians do not encourage their children to stay long at school, as they prefer children working from early age as apprentices of adult relatives. During my fieldwork, I noticed how local schools were often seen by general respondents and informants as daycare centers for children and teenagers, and not as a place to acquire skills and knowledge. But in general, evangelical families, unlike the others, perceive education as a sign of prosperity that reflects divine blessings. Evangelicals also appeared more interested in entrepreneurship associated with opening small shops, often related to technology, because of things that they can learn from tutorials. So fixing phones, installing safety cameras in businesses or private homes, offering printed services of various kinds. This provides new possibilities of income and also allow parents to supervise their children more directly, as they are not away from the neighborhood during working hours. Number 5 of positive consequences: social service in prison and with drug addicts. My friends and peers, and also the non-evangelical informants during fieldwork, often characterized evangelicals as people that preach Christian morality, but in practice care more about themselves than about others. However, little is known in Brazil, at least, about the activity of evangelicals in regards to prisoners and drug addicts. After many months living in the field, I learned several men I knew interacted with regularity had spent time in prison. And I was surprised, not because of their criminal lives, past lives, but because their everyday behavior did not suggest they were once exposed to this type of brutal experience. At least the ones that I knew, they were caring husbands, caring parents, neighbors, and worked hard to earn a living. Sociologist Andrew Johnson concludes, after studying Pentecostalism in Brazil prisons, that this religious practice promotes a sense of dignity and self-respect to that, which is similar to what he saw happening during the civil rights movement in the United States during the 1960s. So evangelical Christianity promoting the sense of dignity and self-respect, similar to this very important case in the fight against racial prejudice. Furthermore, evangelical conversion is today the only way for some people linked with highly complex crime organizations, the largest one with 2,000 members, to get away from these groups and not be without being killed. The only ticket out is an evangelical conversion. So why evangelical Christianity causes discomfort? The second motivation for study the phenomenon of evangelical Christianity was to understand why intellectuals, journalists, and most educated Brazilians are not interested in learning about the phenomenon of this magnitude in Brazil, and which, as I argued above, has positive consequences in an unequal society such as ours. Not only do they lack interest in the topic, this elite intellectuals and educated Brazilians as a whole, they often privately express disdain for evangelicals in general and believe that what they know about religion and Christianity is enough to conclude that the growth in number of evangelicals is bad for the country. I felt this reaction every time a piece about my book appeared in a newspaper and was echoed through social media. A person responded to an interview I gave saying, and I quote, "I'm proud to be prejudiced against crentes, believers, and fuck it," end of quote. Ignoring that such public statements might be interpreted as religious prejudice, which is considered a crime under Brazilian constitution. After reading an interview I gave to the Deutsche Welle, reprinted by Folha de São Paulo, which is a major newspaper, national newspaper in Brazil, A well-known Baptist minister mentioned on his online service that he was surprised that, and I quote, secular newspaper, end of quote, printed something positive about evangelicals, as that is not common. And this is a middle-class evangelical speaking. Often white, affluent, educated Brazilians, myself included before conducting fieldwork, are broadly unaware of the differences between Methodists and Adventists, Assembleianos and the members of the Universal Church of God, and that evangelicals associated with these denominations can be quite different in terms of worldviews and practices. The term Neo-Pentecostalism, coined by sociologist Ricardo Mariano of the University of São Paulo, is generally applied without criteria in newspaper articles and analysis. And the word evangelical, which refers to 68 million Brazilians today, belonging to many different denominations, is often used as a derogatory word, as if the problem being pointed out was the religion and not the attitude of a particular evangelical leader or group. Even the idea of the theology of prosperity is interpreted in a simplistic way, as if prosperity represented only financial advantages and not other types of comforts, such as the access to better health services and harmonious family relationships. I suggest, based on the robust literature produced by anthropologists who have studied Brazilian popular strata in recent decades, that the rejection of evangelicals in Brazil has a component of class prejudice. As anthropologist Claudia Fonseca wrote in a passage that is often cited, and I quote, in some way, Brazil presents itself as an extreme case of class society. This created a system that in many ways can be compared to South Africa's apartheid. There is little contact between rich and poor. They don't live in the same neighborhoods or use the same means of transport. For some, there are private schools, taxis, doctors at $100 per consultation. For others, they scrapped public schools, precarious public clinics, and buses. In short, for many Brazilians, the only moments of interclass occur during the conversation with the cleaning lady or during a crime assault. The 3-meter high walls erected in front of bourgeois houses are like a metaphor for the almost insurmountable gap between those two words. And this is an example of an area nearby where we were, an area near the beach where its residents lobbied against having a bus to bring people from this 1 kilometer long place, the neighborhood, to the beaches, because they call them their beaches. So the idea that prejudice in Brazil intertwines class and race, for example, was analyzed by sociologist Florestan Fernandes since the 1960s. He explained how Brazilian racism takes the form of gradual hierarchy of prestige based on criteria such as formal education, place of birth, gender, family history, and social class. The fact that a person's skin color would not be an explicit impediment to prosper, it's a fact, but society indirectly filters people coming from certain socioeconomic contexts which are more accessible to whites for certain functions and positions. Nearly half of all evangelicals in Brazil earn up to twice the monthly minimum wage, which amounts to 300 British pounds or 410 American dollars. They're equally exposed to this form of class prejudice. Together, evangelicals are, together with the other millions of low-income Brazilians. But evangelicals are also condemned for their attitude of not accepting to be victimized. The American sociologist Susan Harding, according to her, evangelical Christians are a type of other, often rejected by anthropologists, as evangelicals do not accept the position of vulnerable people. This resistance to be pigeonholed is a reason for intellectuals to reject evangelicals while acting as spoken people for indigenous, quilombolas, and other urban poor. So to finish, And I know that I am a bit over my time now, but I'll be very quick. The purpose of my book was not to deny or diminish the importance of real problems that the growth of evangelical Christianity brings to the country. There are reasons for concern. The evangelical vote was directly responsible for the election of ultra-conservative President Jair Bolsonaro in 2018, and churches that have become mega corporations are using their influence to elect politicians that work for these organizations and not for the people who voted for them. The Evangelical Caucus, a bancada evangélica, has more members in Congress than any party in the country. They work closely with traditional elite representatives such as lobbyists representing gun manufacturers and agro-business groups that favor less control over deforestation and indigenous rights. The Evangelical Caucus is mostly concerned with legislation about gay marriage, legalization of marijuana and abortion, and acquiring privileges for churches. They are broadly indifferent about anti-corruption laws, present-day slavery, and projects that promote social justice in general. The phenomenon of evangelical Christianity does not happen only within the scope of state politics, and the evangelical population is larger and more complex than the activities related to leaders of church corporations. In 2010, 1 in 3 evangelicals voted for the candidate opposing Bolsonaro, despite the fact that this candidate, the opposition candidate, Fernando Haddad, publicly called an evangelical leader, and I quote, a fundamentalist charlatan at an interview broadcasted by a Catholic TV station. Anthropologist Jacqueline Teixeira has written about women, members of the Universal Church of God, actively challenging the church's leadership support of Bolsonaro's candidacy. So as social scientist David Smidl summarized, and I quote, at grassroots level, evangelical groups are often the only form of civil society available to people and can have an important local impact by giving them a way to confront violence and injustice in their local context, end of quote. As sociologist David Martin argues, Pentecostalism is a modernizing phenomenon and that has potential to elevate the poor to middle class. In societies where poor people are mostly colored, evangelical churches then represent protection, often new opportunity, and stimulate feelings of dignity and self-respect that are not available elsewhere to those at the margins of our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliano, for your excellent presentation. I feel the very difficult task to be a chair at this talk, because I myself feel I need a little bit of time to think about and digest